Hello and welcome to session 3 of Discover New Authors Festival. This session is called Writing Through Our Lives, and it involves myself, Judith Heneghan and Anne Booth. We're all writers of the same age because we all met at York University back in the 1980s. I believe I met Anne on my first day of term when she very kindly, or second day of term I think it was, when she very kindly made sure I was feeling okay at an event at the Catholic Chaplaincy. And I later met Judy later that term, as Judy was, I think, the chair of the Thomas More Society. I think that was the case. So it was, and then in our second year, my second year, and Anne and Judy's third year, Anne and Judy lived at the top of this beautiful Georgian house called More House, and had rooms on either side, lovely, beautiful attic rooms. They're really typical writers in the attics. And we used to just spend, I just have a very happy memories of evenings spent with a glass of wine, talking about the day we were going to be writers. And so this session is really talking about that 35-year-old friendship, which is really important to all of us, and how it's informed and helped our writing, and what it's been like to write as we've got older and had children and had work commitments and family caring commitments. So I'm going to just introduce you to Anne first, to tell you a little bit about Anne's work and writing. Anne is a children's author, but she's also a writer of adult fiction, and she's working on an adult novel, which I can't wait to come out, about flying nuns. And it's just brilliant and funny and compassionate and wise. But I also love Anne's children's writing, and she's a really prolific writer for all age ranges. She has written 3 fantastic books for catnip for the 11 to 13 or 9 to 13-year-olds. Girl with a White Dog, which is really brilliant about Nazi Germany and its kind of resonance today. Dog Ears, which Anne is going to read from, which is about being a young carer. And her latest novel from that publisher is Across the Divide, which is about pacifism, conscientious objection, and militarism, and standing up for your beliefs, whatever side of that debate you're on. But Anne has also written some fantastic children's series, the Lucy's Secret Reindeer series for OUP, and the Magical Kingdom of Birds series. And she's written some fantastic toddler books for toddlers, The Fairy's Fairy, The Christmas Fairy, I Want to Be Alone, I think that's the one I love, it's the one with a kid cuddling a dragon, and Refuge, which is a terrific prose poem with beautiful illustrations about refugees and the nativity story. So she's a very brilliant writer, and I can't wait for you to hear from her. Judy, that was a long introduction to Anne because she had so many books that she's written. Judy has also written lots of books, and a lot of those books have been for younger people in terms of fiction. So Judy has a very, very long non-fiction study books to write, but she also has written some children's fiction, including the wonderful one that you started off with. Stone Cipher, yes, sorry, I should have just checked before I came on, which I really, at the time, was kind of historical fiction with a bit of magic thrown in it. It really reminded me of Diana Wynne Jones, and a bit thriller. I love that novel. But she has just published her latest adult novel, Snegorochka, which is set in Kiev in the 1990s, which is actually somewhere where Judith lived in the 1990s. And it's a very claustrophobic, intense novel about 4 characters related to this apartment building, and each of them with some secrets and some kind of slightly strange behaviours, and it's a very slowly paced but very beautifully paced build up of threat and danger and senses of danger, but also how you live in a foreign country and how you live in a country that's has survived some quite difficult emotional things in its past, and how it's to be a stranger there, but it's also how it is to grow up there, and the possibilities for reconciliation and resolution as well. And so it's a very beautiful and excellent book. So those are my co-hosts, and I am the author of Echo Hall, which I published with Unbound 3 years ago, which is a sort of gothic fiction and historical drama about 3 women in Wales who have experienced love, loss and conflict in times of war. So it's quite good to be talking about that on VE Day, because one of those wars is World War II. And my second novel has just out last year is The Wave, which is also quite pertinent for now. It's about a group of people who can't escape a tsunami, and really it's about how we face death, which is either quite scary for the moment we're living in now, or quite hopeful. I'm not quite sure, but I think some people who read it have found it quite hopeful at this time. So that's who we are. And we're going to start off with Anne is going to read from Dog Ears, which is one of her middle grade books, and it's one of my favourites of Anne's, I have to say, because it features an 11-year-old girl who rather reminds me of myself at 11 and is very well drawn. So over to you, Anne. And we've got Ali coming into the meeting. So
okay, so this is about Dog Ears. This book is called Dog Ears, and it's about the thing you need to know before I read the extract is that it's about Anna, who lives with her mother and the mother's little baby Jack. Her dad is away working, so it's just Anna, the mother, and Jack at the moment. And the thing to know about Anna is that she's extremely optimistic. She's very positive. She always thinks that things are going to be great. And she's really, really excited because an ex-student from the school, Frankie Santoro, has come back to the school and wants to do a competition. They've got 2 weeks, the school got 2 weeks for the children to form bands, and Frankie Santoro, this pop star, is going to choose one of the school bands to support her in a video. And Anna and her friends, who have absolutely no knowledge about music, are convinced that they can produce a really good band. So the whole school's very excited. But the background is that as the book goes on, you realise that Anna is really taking on more and more of the responsibilities of a young carer. And there's also another character in the classroom that Anna really judges a lot. She's very mean about this girl called Lauren, who doesn't seem to ever join in anything. And then later on we discover in the book that Lauren has been a young carer for a long time and is really not coping. And it's about Anna learning how to say no, and it's also about Anna learning not to judge Lauren. And but in all of this story is told, the only person that she can talk to is Timmy, her dog. So that's why it's called Dog Ears, and why you'll hear her say Timmy, because she comes back from school and there's no one really interested in hearing about her day, so she talks to Timmy all the time. Okay, so she's now telling Timmy about what happens after they've had this very exciting assembly and they've heard that Frankie Santoro is coming, and now they're going back to ordinary classes. In maths, we noticed that Mr. Hawkins had put quite a lot of gel in his hair and was looking very cheered up. He let us have 5 minutes to talk about Frankie Santoro, and then he made us work. I hope he gets on TV. He's always nice, even to Lauren. Most of the teachers get cross with her because she can't be bothered to do her homework. Mr. Peterson gave us loads of homework, and he didn't want to talk about Frankie Santoro at all. He seemed to think that him setting up an interform physics challenge was the most exciting thing that's ever happened to this school. Mr. Peterson is really strange. And then it was break and time for an emergency how to get the TV people to notice us meeting. They'll only interview really special pupils across the school, said Mahona. It's not like we can do breakdancing or anything. We looked at each other. No, we'd never learn in time, said Emma. I bet Jed Rubens will be doing his card tricks, I said. He's in year 10, Timmy, and someone said he's going to be in the magic circle or something. Anyway, he's really good at magic, so we couldn't compete. Well, we're in the choir, said Mahona. They're definitely going to listen to the choir. But we won't stand out. We're just going to have to form a band and audition, Emma said. It can't be that hard. Susie Lyons has got one. That's a good idea, I said. You can play guitar, Emma. I can do violin and Mahona can sing. I couldn't sing on my own. You'd have to sing with me, said Mahona. So I wrote down 1, form a band. 2, learn how to play violin and sing at the same time, Anna. Typically, Susie Lyons overheard our plans. You're not thinking of auditioning, are you? She said, coming up to our desk. You haven't got a chance. Caitlin and Tanisha and I formed our band practically as soon as we started year 7. It's true. Every lunchtime, Susie sits in the music room and plays piano really loudly, and she and Caitlin and Tanisha sing whatever's the latest big hit. I'd like to say they're rubbish, but they're not. They are annoyingly good. They've always been like that. Even at St. Faith's, they always got the best parts and things, but they sort of use up all the air in a room. You're only doing it to be on TV, said Susie. That was true, but Emma didn't let that bother her. So you're doing it purely for the love of music then, said Emma, glaring at her. You can't just ban anyone else from forming a band. True again. Rishi and Sam were already playing air guitars in the corner. You'll be rubbish anyway, said Susie, which was mean and untrue, so that made our true bit slightly better than hers. She stomped off to find Caitlin and Tanisha. Emma says she already knows 3 chords on guitar and thinks she can learn a couple more by the time the film crew come. I can play the violin a little bit now. I've been learning since the start of year 7, which is practically 2 months. Miss Green said in my lesson today that if I practiced, I could be good. So the plan is we will sound amazing and we will win the competition. I really want this term to go well. First of all, I've already sorted out the ingredients for food tech on Wednesday. I don't want another situation like the fish pie. Anna, I'm so sorry. I've been so busy. Tell them what's been happening at home. They'll understand. What do you mean you forgot the fish? Mrs. White said. It's not exactly difficult. You've remembered the flour and margarine. What did you think we were making? Air pie? It was awful, Tim. Everyone laughed. I hate Mrs. White. Mahona said I could have some of her fish, and Mrs. White said, that's very good of you, Mahona. Are you sure? It hardly seems fair that you should have less fish in your pie because someone else can't be bothered to remember the obvious, which was true. But Mahona did have an awful lot of fish. Mum always gives me too much. I'm glad I can share it. And I don't like fish pie anyway, said Mahona. Thank goodness for Mahona. Sorry. That's just a small extract.
Thank you. I think that captures beautifully the tone of the book and that lovely narrator. I just love that narrator's voice. We just got another guest coming in. Welcome, Helen. So I think that really does capture Anna as character, and it's why I love her. And actually, I had a domestic science teacher who was that mean, so I really identified with that scene particularly. So we're going to have some questions now about our writing lives. So the first thing that I want to ask you, and I will answer when you've answered, is when did you decide to be a writer?
Me?
Yeah, Anne first. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think I did it. I think it was as soon as I started to write, really. I think I just really liked the idea of stories, because I remember when I was 5, I think, very laboriously, I remember writing a story for school about, I think it was a Bible story about Jesus curing a little girl, Jairus' daughter. And I was writing it, and I remember that I was taking ages to finish it, but I just couldn't stop, and I was illustrating it, and I was really tired, and I was desperate to get to the end. I remember that even as 5, but I couldn't just stop because I'd not even got to the bit where Jesus had been sort of like, once upon a time there was a little girl who was ill, and I knew that I couldn't stop until the story finished. So I think that feeling hasn't really ended, really, that it's really tiring, and sometimes you think, why did I ever start this? But you can't stop. So yeah. So I think
that's a really good thing. How about yourself, Judy?
Just remembering to unmute. Yeah, I think like Anne, I'd always really from primary school enjoyed writing stories. But there's a difference between sort of enjoying writing stories and wanting to be a writer. And I think I was a child who wanted to please, and a teacher said, oh, you could be a writer. It just shows the power of, the influence of teachers and what they say. They can say very odd things sometimes, and sometimes they can say really amazing things. And for me, I think it was something that I think I was a very nervous child. I was quite frightened of the grown-up world.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, dog.
Sorry. It wasn't about wanting to be something much more, I suppose, felt much more serious and responsible, like being a doctor or being a nurse or being a teacher or something like that. A writer was part of that fantasy of being a grown-up might be okay, and so I think there was a big part of escapism wrapped up in that for me as a child. But you convince yourself that that's how you feel, that's what you therefore are, and then of course we grow up and we've got to somehow work out how to fulfill that fantasy or jettison it.
Yeah, and I think I kind of echo both.
Started out as a fantasy, and then yeah. So over to you, Virginia.
Sorry, I thought you'd finished. So this is why the mute is a good idea. So I agree with Anne and Judith. I started off writing when I was very young, and for those of you who were at the first session this morning with my twin sister Julia, we both used to write. I think almost as soon as we could write, we were writing stories and making stories up, either telling them to each other or writing them down and making little booklets and things like that. And certainly by the time I was at 18, we both did English for A-level, and we were both passionate about we were going to be writers. But I actually then went off and did a biology degree, which didn't seem to kind of be a good fit for a writer at the time. So it was kind of yeah, this is something I wanted to do, but I sort of took myself off in something that wasn't particularly creative, and it was much more my scientific side. And that's where I met Anne and Judith at York. So my second question is, back at York in the 1980s, we used to, as I say, when we were sitting up in one or other of your rooms drinking wine late in the night, we would always be talking about writing and what we wanted to do as writers, and sort of imagining our life as authors. Did either of you think it would take as long as it did to become a writer? Judith, for this one.
I didn't really think about it in terms of timescale. I think I was writing really, really bad poetry, and reading a lot. I mean, we were all, you know, we were all huge readers. I remember spending a lot of time talking about it. And so it was sort of that kind of fantasy of wanting to emulate the writers that I was reading. But in a very unrealistic way, from my point of view, I was, it was all about yearning, you know, at that age, yearning to make a difference, yearning to change the world, but also yearning to be noticed, yearning to be something, to express myself. So it was all about me. And I thought that writing was all about me in a way. And I look back now and I think, gosh, it took me a long time to learn actually that writing is about creating other characters who are not me. And I think that's been, in a way, the biggest part of that writing journey, because I didn't really understand that then. I loved stories, I loved making things up, but that sense of but what do I really want to do as a writer was not formed at all. It was all very hazy. I sent my terrible poems off to the National Poetry Competition, which was the only competition I knew about then. And when I failed to win, was bitterly disappointed. Yeah.
That's great. And Judith, so over to you, man.
Well, I'm sure Judith's right, but I don't remember her poems being terrible, actually. I remember them being really great. So, but anyway, let's argue about that later. But, sorry, I'm so sorry about the disruption with the dog thing. That is typical of writing life, that it's impossible to get things. What, can you just remind me the question again?
Yeah, so the question was, when we were in York and we talked about writing, was that something, did you imagine it would take as long as it has taken us all? Because I think you and Julia were his late 40s when you got published, and I was late 40s, and we're kind of really coming into our own in our 50s. Do you think?
I didn't think it would take that long. No, I applied to York because it said that you could do a ninth of your degree could be your own creative writing, and that you could write your own book and it'd be part of a degree. So at 18, I wanted to write a children's book. But when I got to York, I just lost all my confidence. I just lost the people who were being creative, they seemed to be so self-confident, and they seemed to be so unashamed of being creative, and they seemed to be wilder than me, I thought. Or, you know, I thought you'd have to be a particular sort of person, and but I didn't stop writing, so I was writing all the time, but it wasn't I would always be starting things and then never finishing them, I think. But yeah, so I never thought it would take that long. But I think it was my husband, really. He kept introducing me to people as Anne as a writer. When I was at home with the children, people say, "What do you do?" And he'd say, "Oh, she's a writer." And that was always very embarrassing, because they'd say, "Oh, what have you written? Anything I'd know?" And I'd say, "Well, actually, I haven't written anything, and nothing's been published either." And Graham would say, "Oh, but it will be." And I used to feel like really embarrassed, but I think he sort of it was like a bit like hypnotherapy or something. I think he kept telling me that I was a writer, and so I've finally signed up to do. I remember thinking, I'm never ever going to finish anything. I'm never going to be able to write anything. I'm never going to have the confidence. And then I was looking for a PGC to do. The children were little, and I thought I have to retrain to do something. And I saw there was an MA in creative writing, and it was a part-time, 1 night a week, and I did that for 2 years. And just being in the company of other writers made me realise that I could do it. And then I went to some Arvon courses after that, and that finally made me realise I could do it.
Thank you. Well, I sort of echo what you said about kind of like confidence and not imagining it would take so long. I mean, I as I say, I was in the 1980s. I did a science degree, and before I started at university, I had lived in a large community for people with learning disabilities, and that's what I went on to after I left uni. And I thought maybe because I was doing residential social work to start off with, and I actually had quite a lot of time, more time than I had for years afterwards, because I used to do shifts. So I used to do a 7 to 3 shift, or a 3 to 7 shift, or an overnight, and often had sort of 3 or 4 days off at a time. And you would think, you know, like now I kind of look at that and think, oh, the time to write. And I did at some points I did write a bit, but it was all half finished stuff. And it got harder and harder as I changed jobs to actually focus on my writing. And I had one period when I was out of work for a bit, and I did do a lot of writing then. But I had exactly the same experience you had, Judy. I sent off a short story to a magazine thinking they will think this is great, and then they sent it back and rejected, and that just completely crushed me. And I didn't write another thing for probably another 15 years, I don't think. And I had a similar sort of thing later on, because I suddenly twigged that both of you were starting on your writing. When I was just hitting my 50s, my 40s, sorry, not my 40s, just at the end of my 30s. You, Judith, had started an MA and had written Stone Cipher, and Anne, you told me you were doing your MA, and my twin sister Julia had just done a writing course, and my sister Joanna was doing a poetry course. And I suddenly thought, God, if I'm going to be this writer, I'd better get on with it, because I'm nearly 40 and I haven't even started yet. So that really kick-started me writing. But I think even then, and I knew from Julia how hard publishing was, because she's an editor as well as a writer. But even then, I think if you told me when I was 40 and I started Echo Hall, it would take me 13 years to get it published, I think I might have cried at the time. But I think that's the nature of it. Helen's mentioned, I think courses are really important, not just for meeting like-minded people, but to give us a chance to take our writing seriously. Yeah, and Patrick says that's why I'm doing an MA now. Yes, no, I think we all agree with that. And I did later, at Anne's suggestion, I did later do a writing course, and that was, some bits of it didn't work, but the camaraderie with other writers was really important. That's great answers. So my next question is, have either of you written anything, or have you, or any of your current works, or have you actually brought to fruition any of the ideas you had back in the day, back in the 80s? Is there, have any of those ideas come to life? Anne, I'll turn to you for this one.
I can't really remember, Virginia. I can't really remember all the ideas I had. I think I know that I wrote a story called The Mountain Who Is Afraid of Heights, but and that's never really that's not really happened. I don't think so. I mean, things I liked, like the ducks and blackbirds, and I've just put quite a lot of things about blackbirds in my in the adult novel that I'm writing. So, you know, experiences, but nothing. I can't honestly remember what I was writing. So, how
about you, Judy?
Yeah, I'd say that those influences, I was influenced in ways as a student that I couldn't see at the time, but looking back now, I can really trace ideas. I think I became a children's writer, and I first of all did an MA in writing for children, which I then ended up running at Winchester. But I definitely went into that, influenced very much by Anne talking about children's writing at university and making it exciting as a prospect. She would talk about stories. She had her children's stories were far more fully formed than anything I'd ever thought about, and that definitely stayed with me and influenced me. Then I wrote my novel Snegorochka, which of course was informed by experiences I had as an adult subsequent to university. But funnily enough now, and it's been really interesting preparing for today and thinking about it. I'm now working on a novel that's about a fairly idealistic community set in the Catskills. Well, those influences are there. You know, I lived in the Catskills as a child, but Virginia, you were talking about the L'Arche community that you lived in before you went to university. You then inspired me to go to to live in a L'Arche community for a couple of years after university, and this is what I'm returning to now, not the L'Arche community, but living with people with disabilities in this kind of very benign community, and what can go wrong within that. So looking back, I can see that I didn't have the story ideas then, but you two have directly influenced two things that I'm writing or have written, which is rather lovely to remember.
That is really nice. I'll just stop. That's very kind. Helen says she's gutted for that first rejecting affected you so badly. And how does everyone cope with rejection now? But we'll come up to that question in a minute, because I just wanted to finish this particular question. And it is right, it is being part of a rejection. I would so say I was probably quite melodramatic about it. I didn't feel, I just felt, I think I just didn't have the confidence to know what to do with that rejection. I think it wasn't, I had actually a later thing in my writing course that was much more destructive than that was. It was more just, oh gosh, well maybe I shouldn't be doing this sort of thing, and not having the kind of nous to go, well, you know, you just have to kind of improve yourself. And I mean, I think it's interesting, because I think about what I was writing back then. I had a book that I got 2/3 of the way through and it's still sitting in my shed, and maybe one day I'll go back to it, but I've never picked it up. And I think one of the reasons I didn't pick it up was actually a really good bit of writing advice you gave me, Judy, which was I think I shared the beginning of it, and I was really happy. You know, when you're really happy with a piece of writing, you think it's really great, and then I shared it to you, and you just very mildly said, I think that's a little bit melodramatic. No, it was great feedback. It was great. It was great feedback. It's probably my first writing critique. And I looked and thought, oh yeah, you know, and then I picked it up about 15 years ago, one of the times we were moving house, and I looked at that bit and you absolutely were spot on, because this is why you're so good as a creative writing teacher. But there were bits of it I thought, yeah, maybe I could take that idea. And but I'm not quite sure that I can write that story now, because it was very much driven from my life experiences then. Yeah, and I think Ali's mentioning how hard rejection is. So I'll quickly ask the rejection question, then I'm going to ask Judith to read from Snegorochka. So yeah, so what's oh, and I think Patrick's mentioning, everyone's mentioning their rejections. So Patrick's saying, and this is true, I found a rejection letter from 2000. It's so constructive and encouraging. I was devastated at the time and didn't notice any of that. And I think that's so true as well, is learning to get that thick skin as a writer, so that you go, yeah, okay, I'll take that on the chin. And that's kind of maybe why being an older writer is easier, because you've had all that life experience. So how about rejection for you, Judith, as you?
I've had my fair share. Yeah, I think the hardest rejection probably was I got my children's novel published quite quickly after my MA, too quickly really, because I then went on to write 2 more what I thought of children's novels. But looking back, they weren't really children's novels at all. They were exploring some quite dark things that I suppose I was going through at the time. I was getting divorced and things. I mean, really things that I was trying to push back against writing for children. I couldn't work out quite what I was doing. So I spent 3 years writing two novels that I poured a lot into, and I had an agent. She sent them out. I don't think, looking back, she probably should have sent them out, but she did send them out. And I had a great, hundreds of rejections, and that's always it's always very painful. In the long scheme of things, what it made me do was really think about what I was doing, what I wanted as a writer, and what I was doing and why I was doing it. And so I can look back. It's all very easy to look back, isn't it? And to say, oh yes, that was, I learned a lot. It did me a lot of good. Very, very painful to go through, because a novel takes it can take a year, it can take 10 years. And you put so much aside when you're writing. We ignore children, we ignore partners, we ignore other aspects of our lives. So there is that feeling of guilt associated with rejection. Maybe I should have done something else with that time. And it is hard. There's no doubt about it. Yes, it makes us stronger. Maybe it makes us better writers. But it's hard as well. It just is.
Thank you. I think that's very truthful, and I think the point you touched on about guilt, I can really relate to that as well, because I think I had a lot of rejection with Echo Hall, and I kept a spreadsheet, which was my way of containing my feelings about it, because spreadsheets I find soothing, and my spreadsheet was like how far had it got in the process, and if at one point my statistics were looking quite good, because I think I had about, when I started, I had about 50-50 of complete rejection, 50 sorts of interested, and that was kind of encouraging. And as time went on, that got smaller and smaller. So I think it ended up being 30% of overall kind of interest. But it was a way of me containing that pain, really. But in fact, my worst rejection was not from publishers, because in a way I kind of expected it. My worst rejection was on a writing course when a lecturer gave me some feedback, and I think gave me some feedback in a really unhelpful way that actually almost destroyed me. And it was, I don't think the lecturer intended it to be like that, but I think also my mistake was giving a bit of the novel that I really, really loved as a part of a writing critique, rather than giving something I didn't really care about. But it was really devastating, and I went and met my husband afterwards and rang him up in tears, and we met in the middle of Gloucester Green, which is a really grotty car park in the middle of Oxford, and we sat and I cried, and he said, one day we'll come here with a bottle of champagne and we will celebrate your writing success, which we did. And there's a picture of it on Facebook. So when I finally crowdfunded Echo Hall, that's what we did. So Anne, how about you with rejection?
Well, I think it still carries on, really. The rejections carry on because you just have to keep writing. So I've written some, I think they're really nice picture books, and my agent thought they were really nice picture books, but publishers may be publishing something that's slightly the same, or they've already done something that's slightly, the subject, they like it, but it's not. So it's still a bit disheartening. But the other thing is, it's not rejection, but it's what Patrick was saying about having such a constructive and encouraging rejection letter. You can get that from editing. So I've been writing this blooming novel since I started my MA in 2003. So that's, if it ever gets published, it will not be an overnight success. And it has been written, it's had so many versions that I do think, I've said this to other people, that it's like Trigger's broom in Only Fools and Horses. It's had its handle and the top, replaced so much but it's still got some basic characters. Anyway, I'm being mentored by an amazing person who's offered to mentor me so kindly, and so I really respect her opinion, and I sent it off, for the 150th version of it, and she sent me back a very detailed critique of it at Christmas, and I was absolutely devastated. I just couldn't. I thought, I've been doing this since 2003, and it's still rubbish. And then I know.
Anne, sorry, we've lost your sound a bit. So
sorry.
Yeah, if you come close to the screen, just say that last thing.
I got a critique just at Christmas and was completely devastated and thought she thinks I'm a rubbish writer and, this is awful. And then I had to wait 2 months to actually look at it again. And then I realised, she liked it. It was just the last bit she didn't think worked. And I thought, how did I not get that? How did I feel that that's it? I've wasted my family's life. I'm never going to hit the big time with this novel, 13 years, blah, blah. How did I think that it was so bad when actually she said so many nice things? So I think that's just, and the first time I was ever professionally edited for Girl with a White Dog, I was devastated. After they'd taken me on and they edited me, I phoned the editor up and apologised. I said, I'm so sorry that my book has created so much work. And you must be really sorry that you've taken me on, and I'm so embarrassed. You mustn't have realised how bad it was. And she said, what are you talking about? This is normal. So I've realised now that's normal, but it's still not easy.
No, not indeed. So we're going to just break for a quick reading from Snegorochka, and then we've got another group of questions, and then I'll finish with the wave, and then I think we'll probably be at time then.
Help if I unmute myself. Snegorochka is written in, set in 1992 in Kiev, and it's about a young English mother. She takes her baby, her 3-month-old baby, out to Kiev to live with her journalist husband out there. They're not having a great marriage. She's very isolated, and she's quite troubled. So she adopts lots of obsessive kind of rituals in order to keep her baby safe. That is her prime concern. She thinks that she's anxious about her baby, and in this isolated state, she is forced really to, the shops have nothing in them. She's constantly looking for nappies. She's doing all the washing in a bucket, all of this kind of thing. Life is quite hard, and she's forced to reach out to 4 characters, 4 Ukrainians that she meets, and they sort of forge these rather unlikely alliances, and in some ways that's good for her, and in some ways that's quite dangerous. So the extract I'm going to read starts off with a sort of little moment in Rachel's past. Lucas is her husband, and then it moves to a phone call that she receives from Zoya, who is her husband's driver and fixer, who she is a little frightened of, really. Lucas once told Rachel that he loved her for her secrets. They were lolling beneath a tree on a prickly stretch of New Forest heath, gazing at the clouds piling up like over-yeasted dough, and eating cherries from a bag. He said that Rachel had hidden depths, and he wanted to be the one to plumb them. Rachel had laughed. "My head is empty," she said. "I'm just an airhead. Any thoughts pass straight through me and out the other side." But even as the words slipped from her lips, both knew this was a lie. One afternoon, just after lunch, the telephone rings in the apartment. Rachel, folding washing in the bedroom, thinks it must be Lucas. It isn't Lucas. It's Zoya, her voice flat and tinny on the poor local line. "A driver wishes to deliver 6 boxes of nappies. I told him we cannot take them at the office." Rachel's grip tightens on the receiver. She closes her eyes and breathes deeply. "I said," repeats Zoya, "a driver wishes..." "Sorry," says Rachel, collecting herself. "Sorry. Are they Pampers? Is Lucas there?" "Yes and no," says Zoya. "Lucas has an appointment at the Ministry of Finance. This is why I am calling you." "Right." Rachel is already imagining the nappies with their neat folds and self-sealing fastenings, their soft elastication and velvety leak-proof coating. She wants to touch them, count them. "Can you ask the driver to send them up to Staronavodnitska Street and pay him, please? Use Lucas's emergency dollars. I'll pay it back." "I have told the driver to return tomorrow. He has no paperwork, no invoice." "Zoya!" Rachel tries not to shout. "I need them now, tonight." "Then I'll tell him to come back. Lucas can drive them up later." Rachel is still absorbing the fact that the nappies have arrived at all. Lucas doesn't know about the order. He'll hate the fact that she's buying them from Rob, but she won't let him refuse to take them as he refused to take the washing machine. "Zoya, listen. Lucas is trying to save money, but I need those nappies and I ordered them without telling him. Please, can you drive them here for me? She hesitates. "I can give you $10 if that helps." Zoya doesn't reply, and the phone goes dead. Rachel assumes she has gravely offended her and weeps at her own stupidity until 40 minutes later the doorbell rings and she spies Zoya standing on the landing with several cardboard boxes balanced on top of the washing machine. "I have done this for Ivan," says Zoya when Rachel opens the door, still blowing her nose. "Clearly, if you don't receive Pampers, you will become insane." The 2 women stare at each other, Zoya frowning as she always does, her plucked eyebrows a line of rebuke, a line that will not stand a challenge, yet perhaps can bear a truce. "Thank you," says Rachel.
That's a terrific reading, thank you. I think it captures a lot of the novel, which I really highly recommend as an excellent read. So I think that kind of follows, and you touched on it earlier on, Judith, when you were talking about experiences, about how much of our lives have informed our writing. And I'm going to kick off with answering this question and then go to the two of you, because I mentioned earlier today that it's VE Day today, and my novel Echo Hall is about both pacifists and people who go to war, and the three wars that I'm looking at are World War One, which was my grandparents' generation, World War Two, which is my parents' generation, and the Gulf War, which I experienced as a kind of person watching from a distance. So the 90s is quite like your book is kind of set a year later, actually, the year before your book, the 90s section of my book. And I'm kind of thinking a lot about World War II today, because obviously it's VE Day, and I was realizing last night that, or earlier in the week, that the last time I saw my father before he died was a celebration for VE Day in 1990, and we went to service the day before VE Day, and then my mother actually died on VE Day. So there's a kind of real emotional pull to me about VE Day, but that emotional pull was also in the book, so that I never feel like World War II is very far away from me, because it was so important to my parents' generation. And my father went to war. My mother was a child growing up. I had uncles who went to war. I had an aunt, my godmother, like my character Elsie, had a husband in the RAF that she didn't see for, I think, 2.5 years at one point. And I had another aunt and uncle who the same thing happened to. So there's a whole thing about absence in Echo Hall that came very much from those family relationships. But then the other side of Echo Hall is the pacifist side of it, and so in the World War One story, I have a conscientious objector, and also in the World War Two story, and both of those characters go to jail. And Rachel, whose husband Joseph goes to jail, is not like me. She is very reluctant to be the wife of a pacifist, whereas I met a pacifist and married him, and that's part of my life. And my husband Chris had been to jail before I met him, and has been to jail a couple of times, very short periods. So the absence of a partner in jail is something I know what that's like for a very short period of time, and that very much informed that story. But I felt there was a connection between your husband being away to war, where everybody thinks they're a hero, and your husband not being away to war. And I think in these days now, people think that can be quite heroic, but in World War One they certainly didn't. And so that kind of real life experience sort of, it played with that novel. And I think in The Wave, which is my latest novel, that's been very much, as I said at the beginning, it's a book about how we approach death, and that's really been affected by my experience of death of a friend pipped 10 years ago this year, and how positive she was in the face of death, and how she was so committed to living life as life was to be lived, and even to the right last moment, really, when she was very ill, her life had meaning. And I think the same for my mother, who I'd written the book before my mother was diagnosed with cancer, but I went back to it after she died, and she had a very similar approach to life. And I was also thinking a lot about the people in 9/11 and those conversations that happened when the people in the tower were ringing, and all those conversations about love, that those messages are very heartbreaking when you hear them. And that kind of really informed that sort of sense of, if you knew your time was up, how would you spend it? And also, because life isn't perfect, all those characters on the beach have some regrets that they're trying to deal with as well. So that's kind of how life kind of got into my novels. And how do you think, has life affected your novels?
Hello. Yes, definitely, definitely, in everything, I think. Sorry, Mike. Yeah, either the picture books, they may have some aspect of me in them, or some understanding of what it's like to be little. The children's books, so Dog Ears was informed by me being a carer, and thinking, gosh, it's really hard being a carer. I was a carer for about 9 years, but I was thinking, gosh, but I'm a mum, and I'm an adult, and I've had lovely life, and there are lots of little children who are being carers, and what chance have they got? So that's why I wanted to write something about children not having much chance. So I think it sort of leaks into your life, isn't it? It's not necessarily, you don't necessarily write exactly what you're writing. So, for example, the novel that I'm writing for adults has 3 elderly nuns. So I'm not an elderly nun, but one of the nuns is just only a little bit older than me, and she's wondering about her life and wondering has it finished, and has she got anything else to give? And I think that's something that I would recognize in myself. You know, at a certain age, you think, well, gosh, I've lived a lot of my life, what's coming next, and did I make the right choices, and is there anything new to happen? So yeah, basically I think you bring thoughts and experiences, and also other people that you see and you wonder about, like you said about the wave, you know, about the last messages. Things strike you, and you realize that this is something I want to follow up. Yeah.
So over to you, Judy. Thank you for that, Anne. That was great.
Yeah, most definitely. I think with writing Snegorochka, I mean, there are very clear and overt parallels with my own life, in that my character lives in the flat that I lived in. You know, I went out there with a 3-month-old baby at that time. So those circumstances and the setting are deeply personal, and my challenge was to make my character not me. I didn't want to write about me, but I wanted to use my experience of those circumstances. I desperately wanted to write about Kiev at that time, and about the relationship between foreigners coming in and Ukrainians, people in Kiev, and the divide between them that really was never bridged. And so how to do that? So I thought, okay, well, I'll take my own circumstances, but I need to create a character who isn't me. So I had to very, very consciously give her characteristics that were not mine, give her problems that weren't mine, which is where the whole fearing for her baby, worrying that she was going to harm her baby came from. That is not my experience at all, thank goodness. But that meant that giving her those circumstances, she had to become someone else. She had to be married to someone who was not my husband at the time. She had to have a family who was not my family. My family would have jumped on a plane and dragged me back to to the UK. You know, I didn't want that to happen to her. So she had to become someone different. But what I did want to hang on to was that sense of wandering around as someone who couldn't communicate with anybody. There were very few other women there with children. You know, mothers weren't on the street. They didn't really, you know, take their babies out very much. And so wandering around as a foreigner, as someone who could look but not understand. But I felt very strongly that, you know, women with babies have a very, very particular and precise vision of the world. It isn't all some cotton wool fug, but actually they see the world in a very different way at that time. They have a very particular perspective. And I wanted to write a novel that was political in some ways, that, you know, to make the domestic political, not to consign it to something that was, you know, as I say, merely a novel about another woman with a baby. So I was bringing, you know, very consciously bringing in a lot of my own thoughts and desires into that novel, but writing within a character who I felt was not me. So I was really conscious of that business of to what extent we are writing ourselves and our own experiences, and to what extent we're creating something different. And the 4 characters that she surrounds herself with are not, you know, they're not collages of they are completely unfamiliar characters to me. I wanted to create that sense of someone, of having that experience of sitting on a trolley bus, thinking again about VE Day and about the war, you know, thinking, I can't talk to these people. There's someone, you know, 80 years old on a bus opposite me, staring at me, looking pretty cross. What is she thinking? What has she experienced? She will have lived through famine, the purges, the Second World War, invasion, you know, all of the sort of stasis after the Second World War. I can't begin to understand that, but I want my character to glimpse some of that. So that's very, very related to, you know, to feelings that I had when I was there. So it's all mixed up together, isn't it?
That's great. That is great. There's really great answers from both of you. So we've only got about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to go for the last question. which was it's about us as friends really, and just how do you think having friends who are writers, does it help your writing? So I'll go to Anne first.
Yes, it's fantastic to have friends who are writers, because you understand how difficult it is, you know, and I value your opinions and your I think it's very difficult to explain to people what writing is like. It's not, it's a job, isn't it? And you know, and it's not very secure. It's not very secure financially, and it's quite, you make yourself quite vulnerable personally, but you don't have this entourage of people to support you, you know, because they don't. It's very strange. It's a strange world to be a writer. So it's lovely to have writer friends. Yeah, but yeah, it's fantastic.
Judy?
I'm going to be very quick. It's fantastic having writer friends. I wouldn't, you know, for the support, as Anne says, for that sort of understanding of the obsessions that we have as writers, the time we spend looking out of a window, thinking through a problem, and the support. But you know, the support and understanding is phenomenal, and I'm so grateful for my writing friends. Yeah, they make it worthwhile. Virginia.
And I'd kind of just echo that, but I think one of the things I wanted to say was that I think earlier on, Judith, you were saying about how Anne and I had inspired you, and I think the two of you have really been troopers for me. I think that journey we've all talked about the rejection, is because I really vividly remember those. I loved those books that you had rejected, and I really felt your pain. And and I know I've watched Anne go through the Nuns book, which I also love, and I really want to see in the world. But you've both really supported me through my own rejection, and the amount of times, I can't tell you. I think particularly Anne, just because I think I've dumped on Anne more than I've dumped on Judy. You know, that I've kind of said, oh, I feel really desperate about my writing, and Anne, you've been very good at saying you'll be fine, it'll be out there, it'll be better, and you're absolutely right. And Judith has done the same. And I think actually the last time the three of us got together was when we came to Winchester in your house when we turned 50. We had a lovely weekend, or no, I think it was a night actually. We couldn't afford a weekend with children, but we had a really lovely evening. And I remember talking about the projects we were working on now, and some of those are published and some of those aren't. And I think we talked about not the Nuns, but I think we all talked about Across the Divide, which is published. We talked about Snegorochka, we talked about The Wave, and where we were with those things. And I think having people who know the journey you've taken to write the book is really helpful, and I'm very glad that we've had a 35-year-old friendship to do that. So it's kind of been really great talking to you both today. So I don't know if you had any kind of wrapping up comments, Anne. You've got your head scratching your head, so it looks like you want to say something. Oh, you need to unmute.
I want to hear more from you, Virginia. We're running out of time for you to read your.
Oh, okay. If anyone's we'll run over a little bit. Okay, so I will just do a very quick reading from The Wave then.
Yeah, which is, by the way, is absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
I cried so much.
Okay, thank you. That's the cover. The cover has actually been changed. This is a very bold cover, and we've got a slightly gentler cover. If you look at it online, I like both of them. I think they're both great. But I think, you know, this captures a group of people sitting at sunset, which is the kind of ethos of the book. So I'm just going to read the Facebook page that kind of launches the book, because basically there's been news on Twitter and BBC Breaking that this wave is coming, and people are trying to escape. Facebook, Poppy Armstrong, 30th of August, 12:45 p.m. I'm going to die tomorrow. Sorry to be so melodramatic, but if you've seen the news, you'll know it's true. It took a while to sink in, didn't it? The idea that only yesterday the geologists at Las Palmas were so sure the seismic activity they were observing wasn't unusual, they didn't even raise an alert. The revelation that if it hadn't been for a bored intern noticing that the tiny tremors were building to a huge unexpected one, we'd have been carrying on with life as normal. The knowledge that it took so long for that intern to persuade her superiors that they were about to witness a massive volcanic collapse. There are now less than 12 hours to go before half the mountain falls into the sea, raising mega tsunamis that will hit the American, UK, Irish and African coasts by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So that I and thousands of others will be killed by the time most of you are getting out of bed. The how, when and why of our deaths making headlines around the globe before it has even happened. I'm still trying to think of it as a blessing of sorts. After all, it's more than most people get. Victims of a car crash receive no such warning. The terminally ill can't know the exact point of their disease will overwhelm them. The elderly face a slow decline. I'm lucky, really, to know the precise instant my life will end. It provides me with this one tiny consolation. Knowing how much time I have means I get to plan how to spend each moment, and I mean to make the most of every last second. Because for me, the information has come too late. The authorities have managed to evacuate some hospitals, and it seems some local dignitaries cannot be allowed to drown. But they say there's no time to execute a rescue plan for the rest of us. We will have to make our way by road, rail, or boat. 3 million people attempting to leave this narrow peninsula simultaneously. Already it is a less than edifying sight. The roads are too narrow, the station too crowded, the boats are available in insufficient numbers. I do not want to spend my last hours like this, frantic, rushing, out of control, in a race I have no chance of winning. Perhaps I am wrong, but I have weighed up the odds, and finding them stacked so heavily against me, I have made my choice. If this is the remaining time allotted to me, I will spend it doing what I want. The sun is shining, the surf is up. It is a perfect day for the beach. There's no point keeping the shop open, so I'll pack a bag, bring my tent and pitch it down at Doretha Cove, my favourite place in the world. If this is to be my last day, my last night, I want to spend it doing everything I love, swimming, surfing, lying out among the stars. I want to make the most of the time left to me. Perhaps there are some people out there who feel the same. If so, it would be good to have company. Join me, won't you? There you go. Thank you. So yeah, thank you. Thank you both for the comments in the chat. And as I was reading that, I suddenly thought, gosh, there was a little bit of the lack of preparation that seems a bit to speak to the times we're living in. I just wanted to sort of say, just for one more minute, just to give each of you a chance to say one last thing, and then we'll wrap up. And thank you very much for your attention, everybody. So Judith.
It's been lovely to join you both, and to have guests here as well. And what I would say is, you know, we all have to find our writing friends where we can, whether we've had them for 35 years or whether it's about joining a writing group now or doing a course or just meeting people on a train like Patrick and Virginia. You know, thank goodness, you know, for those writing relationships whenever they come to us, really.
Great. Anne?
Yeah, the same. Thank you, Virginia, for organising this, and good luck, Patrick and Ali and Helen and Judith. That reading was fantastic, really wonderful, and Virginia. So yeah, good luck to us all, and thanks, Virginia, for organising. Sorry about the chaos about the dog and.
Thank you. It was writing life, and it was lovely to have the dog, because I meant to say that both Anne and Judy are dog people and I'm not, but I love the way dogs are always in Anne's books in some form or other, so I love that about your writing. So just the last thing to conclude, which I'm concluding every session, is I'll be sharing the recording of this on Twitter and Facebook, and also just look out for the Authors Discover Twitter feed, where I'll be sharing bookshops. So please buy books from bookshops, keep bookshops